talk. Just give me a quick reaction about what you guys felt when Syracuse really had that Marquette game in hand. We'll start with you, Aaron. What were kind of some of the things that you immediately first thought when the clock hit 0-0 and Rakeem Christmas is going around hugging everybody?
Well, going into the game, I thought, there's no way we're going to lose to Marquette for a second time this year. So I kind of chalked it up as a win. But then the second the game started, of course, you become a nervous Nelly and start going, we're going to actually lose. Buzz Williams is going to be headed to the Final Four, and we're going to watch him dance in front of us and watch this week and see Marquette in the Final Four. So, once we built the big lead in the second half, and it looked like it was going to happen, I guess it looked finally over when, Michael Carter-Williams nailed that three. It was a good feeling. It was a happy feeling.
What about you, Chris? I mean, obviously you're one of the more active members on the site. What was your first reaction when Syracuse beat Marquette?
I mean, it's obviously a great feeling, but I won't say that I didn't have any doubts about the game, but at the same time, Buzz Williams, and just even thought of Buzz Williams in the Final Four to me was fairly ridiculous, because he's done a great job this year, losing Jay Crowder and Darius Johnson-Holden, but he's just not that level of coach to me. He's not yet.
And then, what about you, John? Round it out. What was the emotions as Syracuse finally beat Marquette?
Well, admittedly, I can be one of the resident pessimists, and that's saying a lot from a Syracuse fan. But I would say pure terror until about the 120 mark, where I had finally accepted the fact that we were actually going to do this and actually going to get to the Final Four. So I think it was screaming, yelling, calling my roommate from college. I guess a weight felt lifted, and I'm sure that's something a lot of people felt. I know it's only been 10 years, but at the same time, I had no idea what to think, that this team, of all the teams in the last 5 years, could do it, while I think the quote-unquote better teams that we've had just couldn't get it done.
Kind of going off of that note, with the relationship, we'll have some Bleacher Report article, I'm sure, about somebody ranking the top 10 Syracuse teams of all time, and this team won't be on, number 1, number 2, or number 3, or something like that. But obviously the big thing about this team is the 2-3 zone, and there's been a lot of breakdown about what's so special about it. Why did this zone shut down the number 1 offense in the country? We'll start with you, John. What do you think is making this zone so special this year?
I mean, I think a lot of it is just we don't have a traditional center this year, and I feel like for the last couple of years we have. We had just a bunch of really lanky guys who can just, completely cover that back line. Look at just Michael Carter-Williams, I feel like, is kind of the catalyst there. You're looking at a 6'5", point guard. Not a lot of teams in the country can, trot that out. And the fact that I think it might have been Trish, it might have been MCW that said this before the game. They've all been playing in this zone for so long together that I think something finally clicked during the Big East tournament. Obviously here we are with probably one of the more impressive defensive efforts through the first 4 games of a tournament run. I can remember at least.
And Chris, what about you? What's been making this defense hold teams to record low shooting? I mean, you look at some of the shooting percentages that other teams have put up against Syracuse, and you think that you're playing a video game because of how bad the percentages are.
Yeah. Well, like John said, his length, especially Mark Carter-Williams and Bakita in the middle, and in the wings, James Sutherland has a 7-foot plus wingspan. But in the tournament in particular, it's just been straight energy execution, covering the three-point shooters, hustling back to the interior help, getting those weak side blocks. And I like making the analogy of football, where in football, somebody stands at the ball carrier and somebody else comes and tries to strip the fumble. Well, it's the same thing, and this is in the zone. He just stands there to slow somebody down. That lets CJ or Southie come in and get that weak side block. And really, it's something that you can't really plan for. They made Zeller look like a little girl. They made him look like he's playing modified girls basketball out there. He's supposed to be one of the best players in the country, and it's really that
And then Aaron, rounding it out with you, 2-3 zone's been fantastic. What stands out to you about this defense?
Well, I mean, it is linked in athleticism and commitment in the tournament. And I think one thing this zone is doing that past ones haven't is we probably have our two best rebounding guards we've ever had. MCW's an unbelievable rebounder. He can go mix it up with centers and power forwards and come out with the board when he really wants it. And we're not leaking out a lot for fast breaks, which has long been our bread and butter for easy baskets, but can lead to not finishing possessions. And we're not leaking out as much this year, perhaps because we're not that good at it all the time. But it's working for finishing possessions and shutting teams down.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's pretty much summed it up, and I think it was Boeheim's press conference today where he said that it's just a basic 2-3 zone where there is a set recipe to defeating it, but this team's just been executing it so well that other teams are getting flustered. It's really disrupting their style of play, and I mean, I think everyone will agree with me that last year with Fab Melo, that could have been the best defensive team that Syracuse has had in a while, just because of his ability to take a charge, force guys that are driving down the lane towards him to have to readjust their shots and everything. And this year's defense is so different than that a lot of teams that are even familiar with Syracuse can't exactly plan for that. But when you look at Michigan, I've been watching a bunch of preview videos. I'm sure everyone else has been doing the same. Some people say it's a great matchup for Syracuse because Michael Carter-Williams and the rest of the team has the size advantage like what we saw in Indiana. Other people say Trey Burke is arguably the best player in the country when it comes to scoring. We all saw what he did against Kansas. I listened to what happened in the Florida game, and it just sounded like he had his way with the entire Florida defense, which is arguably one of the top 5 defenses in the country. So we'll just kind of start with you, Chris. Is this a bad matchup for Syracuse? Is Trey Burke the guy that will finally break down the zone, or is this zone defense good enough to handle arguably the best scorer in the country?
Well, he's definitely got potential to do it because he's probably the best overall player and definitely the best point guard in the whole country. And it's mainly this penetration. He can get in the lane, cause havoc. That's what he did against Kansas. Getting in the lane and dumping off to McGarry. Gary didn't have 25 points on his own. It was all dump offs, rebounds. And then he has the outside shooters to complement his penetration right away to big. And Robinson can hit. Stauskas was 6 for 6 against Florida. So it's really a combination of everybody, but he's really the key. But I also think, like you said, it's a matchup that can favor Syracuse in terms of Michigan is smallish, not just Burke, who's 6 feet tall. So Carter-Williams and Trich will have the advantage there. Anytime they're on the floor together. But their forwards are all 6'6". Stauskas is 6'6". Carter-Williams is 6'6". Robinson is 6'6". Gary's 6'10". He's the only guy on the whole squad that's over 6'8". So it might not be as pronounced as it was against Indiana, but Syracuse is going to have a size advantage again in this one, and the game plan should be pretty similar. Exploit that mismatch and force Michigan into those long contested jumpers.
What about you, Aaron? When you look at this matchup, what do you see as favoring Syracuse, favoring Michigan? Who has the overall advantage here?
Well, the only thing that scares me about Michigan is kind of the miraculous shots Trey Burke was hitting in the second half against Kansas. And he's going to have to hit those long shots against us because, he's not going to get 25-footers. He's going to get 30-footers against us. And the corner 3 worries me a bit, although CJ and Sutherland have been great on closing it the last few games. As for scoring on them, I'm shockingly not that concerned about that. For Bam's entire career against John Beilein, it's been alley-oop city against his patented 1-3-1 zone that probably shouldn't be patented. So I'm not that concerned on either end of the court. And if they hit a lot of threes from long distance, well, it's not going to be our day. But I don't see that happening.
And then finally, rounding it out with you, John, what do you see as the matchup? What are you reading into it when you look at the stats?
I mean, for me, this actually reminds me a lot of last year's Wisconsin game in the Sweet 16. I mean, they're looking at a team that could potentially be a threat from three, but I don't really see them being able to penetrate this zone. So they're going to live and die by the three. I know that's what Wisconsin did, and ultimately we eked it out last year. I know some Syracuse teams have played this game in the past. I think if we can play solid D inside, and I don't really see why that won't be the case, it'll just be a question of will enough threes fall for us to lose. And if we get smart, like we have on the offensive end, penetrate, because, again, it works both ways. They're not going to be able to play us inside on either end of the floor. I think if Trish and MCW can do what they've been doing, just penetrating, getting fouls. Obviously, like I said, they don't have a lot of bigs, so forcing some foul trouble early on, I think we stand a really nice chance.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing that stands out for me in this is that Trey Burke, I watched the final 10 minutes of that Kansas game, and I've not, this season at least, seen a player take over the game the way Trey Burke did. I mean, that final three was just absolute luck / whatever you want to call it, onions if you're Bill Rafferty. And I think that when you look at Indiana on paper is just a better version of Michigan, and Syracuse gave Indiana a week of preparation, and they absolutely handled them, and it wasn't even Indiana looked so lost against the zone. Obviously, I think John Beilein has better history of coaching against Boeheim, kind of knows some of the wrinkles, but I think it's safe to say I'm echoing everyone else's opinions here in that if Michigan starts hitting the threes, then yeah, it's going to be a long day. But overall, I think that Syracuse has an advantage in this kind of matchup and should move on.
You brought up a good point, and that's the other thing that scares me about Burke is not just his ability to penetrate, because I'm not 100% confident that Carter Williams and Trish can keep him in front of them, consistently. But the way you said, he's a gamer. He's the guy that will hit the 30-footer to keep his team in the game. And not that Syracuse couldn't handle that, but it's something that's been lacking from all the teams they've played so far. Indiana didn't have that guy. Cal didn't have that guy.
You don't think Oladipo's a gamer?
Sorry?
You don't think Oladipo's a gamer?
Normally he is, but he wasn't in that game. And maybe they'll be able to shut down Burke in that capacity too. But I think that Burke is just one of those guys that has that little bit of extra. Oladipo's, a fabulous competitor and a great player, but I don't think he has that intangible thing, the thing that we would attribute to like a GMAC, somebody who's just a gamer, a baller, that's just going to find a way to win.
I mean, kind of taking off what Sean likes to do a lot of times, and lump all the media into one thing. The one thing that everyone's been saying against Syracuse this week is that they lack that go-to guy. It's the same argument we heard last year. So let's pretend we're going to be Doug Gottlieb here, and we're going to categorize every team into one kind of similar makeup, and everybody's got the one go-to guy. Who on Syracuse, Aaron, do you think is going to be the guy that steps it up and has the great game, and if Trey Burke goes off, is able to match him shot for shot, or is able to give Syracuse the momentum to hold off that late surge by Michigan?
Well, it's MCW. He might not necessarily be a guy who will ever score 30 points in a game, but even against Marquette, he led us in every single statistical category except points. So he's the go-to guy when we need a block, when we need a steal. He's the go-to guy to get in there and mix it up to get a big rebound. When he made a turnover on the first play of the Marquette game, he immediately went back, got a block, and then immediately went back and scored. So, he's not a Michael Jordan go-to guy, but he is a go-to guy in college basketball who can do, he's a five-tool player in college basketball, and that's really, really rare. So I'm as happy to have him as anyone.
What about you, John? Do you think it's MCW, or do we see the reemergence of another Syracuse player?
I mean, honestly, I think Aaron hit the nail on the head. Like, we don't need a go-to guy that's going to score 30. We don't need a guy trying to do the same kind of crap that Siebendorf used to do and the stuff that Johnny Flynn would do occasionally. If we try to match Trey Burke shot for shot, we will lose if it's one guy. But if we do our usual, we have a team effort from and put together a couple complete games, and ideally that's MCW and fair. putting together 2 decent games, and whether that, I think for MTW, that's a line of maybe 10 points, 8 assists, 7 boards. I think if you can get that out of Carter Williams and reduce the turnovers, I like our chances.
I hear you. And what about you, Chris? Is there a go-to guy, or is this going to be a team effort kind of game? If there's a go-to guy, who is it?
Well, clearly, Carter Williams is the guy you want making the plays, and Aaron has it right in terms of he'll go in there and get that big rebound, he'll go in there and get that steal. We saw it back in February against Louisville where he literally stole the game from them. But if we're talking about a guy who's going to match Trey Burke shot for shot in a big game, it's James Sutherland. Everybody knows that he can go off for 6, 7, 8 threes in a game at any time, and he has no fear. He has no conscience. He will take that shot if Syracuse needs it. So, shot for shot, I'll go with James Sutherland. But overall, making a play, it has to be
And kind of looking at all this put together, I know I don't want to, jinx anything. I don't want to say anything, but hypothetically, let's say that Syracuse ends up winning it because we all predicted what happened. Michigan can't do anything about it. Can't handle Michael Carter-Williams, and Trey Burke gets shut down. They can't hit the 3. And on the other side of the bracket, we have Louisville, Wichita State, which many people are calling the most lopsided game in the tournament. Louisville will run them out of the Georgia Dome. Hypothetically here, I'm going to put that in big quotes, hypothetically, what happens if it's a Syracuse-Louisville rematch? John, we'll start with you. What, just in the back of your head, what does that bring to your mind?
I mean, admittedly, I'm terrified of Louisville. If we get past Michigan, I think if Louisville is the worst possible case on the other side of that bracket. The way they've been playing, I'd say Syracuse and Louisville have been playing the 2 best in most complete tournaments thus far. Louisville's just dominated anybody they faced. I mean, they made Duke look absolutely silly in the second half on Easter, and to be honest, I don't like our chances, but then again, I didn't like our chances when we beat them a couple months back when they were ranked number 1. So if it's meant to be, I think this Syracuse team will pull it out against anybody. If it's not, I would not be surprised to see Louisville be the team that finally figures us out in this tournament.
What about you, Chris? Syracuse, Louisville, just what's the gut reaction to that?
I'm not terrified of Louisville. Beat them back in February at the Young Center, had them up, down, 16 Big East tournament, and yeah, they destroyed Syracuse, the latter part of the second half. But the manhandling came strictly at the hands of the pressure. So if Trish, Carter Williams, and probably Fair, because he's going to be handling the ball some too, if they can handle that pressure, Syracuse would be right there. And that's really all it is. It's just, for whatever reason, in the second half of the Big East championship game, they got routed by the pressure, and Louisville was able to take advantage. And I think that, not that they were unprepared before, because it's coming when they're playing Louisville, but I think that they can handle it better this time. And I'm guaranteeing a win, obviously, but it won't be the way it was. Although I will admit that between the whole Kevin Ware situation and Russ Smith on the verge of Kemba walkering the Cardinals to the title, they're definitely a formidable opponent. But I think Syracuse can hang with them.
And finally, rounding it out with you, Aaron. I mean, that's a really good point about the whole intangible. Kevin Ware has been the story of the tournament, I guess, if you want to say so far, if you had to put a storyline on it after that gruesome injury. If Syracuse were to play Louisville, what would happen in your mind?
Well, I mean, I feel like I should be scared to death, but intellectually, we could have swept them this year. We were tied, I believe, 48-48 in the Dome before Trish poorly inbounded it. We were up 16 in the Garden before we were unable to dribble the ball. So perhaps they shot their wad in the Big East tournament game and gave us a blueprint for beating them. Trish has been doing more ball handling duties since then and getting the ball up court. I think it'll be called tighter, officiating-wise, in the final. I thought it was really loosely called at the Garden. Of course, I was in the worst seat in the house and pretty drunk, so maybe it wasn't. but I like to think that's why we lost that one. But we've shown all year that the games are going to, at worst, be close with Louisville, and we're going to lead in nearly every single game with them. So I see no reason with 10 minutes to go in the final against Louisville it wouldn't be a few possession game. I think we'll have a shot.
And I am obviously the king of jinxing everything. I always find a way to do it in baseball. When I minor league announced, I actually got booed off the air because they said I jinxed everything. So I'm not going to go out there and say that anything's going to happen. But if Syracuse were to play Louisville, I think it would be very intriguing. And I think that the whole Boeheim-Patino thing would take a very, very, very interesting turn after that. And I think that's got to be the storyline if that matchup were to happen, especially since that old Boeheim getting really ticked off that, the Post Standard mentioned that he had lost to Patino so many times in a row reemerged this week because of the John Beeline reference that's also in that rant. And I think that the fact that, interestingly enough, I know that I don't know the exact numbers for how many Final Fours Patino has been to, but he has the exact same number of national championships as Boeheim does. So I think Boeheim's admitted that he takes everything personally. And I think that if Syracuse were to get into the championship against Louisville, I think that the team would realize that I think it would be a very emotionally charged game, which would lead to a very chippy game, which would then lead to neither team really executing their styles well, which would then make it a toss-up, which then means that it's March and it's just going to be absolutely crazy. So I think that that's what I'd like to see if Syracuse wins the national championship, is for them to knock off Louisville, but obviously they're absolutely out of this mind right now with how they're playing. But of course, they need to beat Michigan first to get there. We'll go through the official prediction round table now. We'll start off with Chris and work our way down the line. What's your official prediction for the Syracuse-Michigan Final Four game?
Well, I think that Syracuse has the distinct advantage in two areas. They have the much better defense. Michigan, they're not exactly a seed on defense, plus they're not intimidating really either. And then the size. Either Trish or Carter Williams is going to abuse Burke in the post, just like they did against Indiana. And then even on the wings, like I said, you have long 6'8" athletes in Fair and Sutherland against 6'6" shooters. So I like Syracuse to win another Jay Billis-style rock fight, 55-49.
Wow, that would be another probably career low for Michigan, and 2-3 zone gets lots of credit for that one. What about you, John? If you had to predict the Syracuse-Michigan game, what's your official prediction?
I mean, I think it's going to come down to whether Michigan's threes fall or not. And I think on our end, it's going to come down to free throws. I've been a naysayer in the comments over the last couple of weeks as far as if a game comes down to free throws, we're screwed. And I mean, so we're in the Final Four. I'm thrilled beyond belief. But if a game comes down to free throws, I don't like our chances. That said, I see a tough-fought game that comes down to a couple choice steals by one Michael Carter-Williams and a final score of 62-58. Q's heads back to the national championship game.
And round it out, Aaron. What do you see happening in this Final Four matchup?
I think we'll have a close first half of lead changes going back and forth. I think we'll start wearing them down in the second half. And I think they'll make it a closer score than it actually was, with a few desperation threes in the final minutes, as we miss our front ends of 1-and-1s to pull away. Syracuse 60-55, Michigan.
And I have this thing, and I know that somebody who will watch this video knows about this thing, is that whenever I say Syracuse will get absolutely rocked, they come out and I don't think they have anything personal against me, but they go out and disprove it every single time. I said in football that the Syracuse-Louisville game would be arguably the worst football game under the Doug Marrone era, and we obviously know how that ended. I said that they'd get rocked by Indiana, and I said that Marquette and Buzz Williams would pull it out, and so I'm not going to jinx anything. I think that Trey Burke goes off, and I think that somehow Michigan pulls it out at the end. It comes down to free throw shooting, and by Matrix, Keita doesn't become the clutch free throw shooter that he's magically become within the last 3 weeks. and Syracuse loses one that goes into the 70s for the first time in this tournament, and Syracuse loses 70-65. And I'm hoping that the jinx continues in some way, shape, or form. But thank you all for joining us in the Final Four preview show. Aaron, have a fantastic time in Atlanta. Make sure that Sean doesn't get so drunk that he completely trashes the site.
Sounds good.
Everyone else, we'll be watching with the rest of Orange Nation. And if everybody in the comments leave your official predictions, tell us who out of the five of us is out of the four of us is the most insane. And I think that just proves it's me. Alrighty, everybody. See you next time. Hopefully, when Syracuse is in the national championship game.
See ya.